Yes, and we're
Hello.
live.
Yes, welcome everyone to the AWS User Group, the Netherlands July Meetup on Amazon OpenSearch. Thank you so much for joining us today at our virtual meetup, while we all look forward to seeing each other in the flesh again sometime in the near future. Before we start, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Rodi Zwijnenberg. I'm an AWS certified developer at Luminous. Currently, I'm working on both front and back end applications, mainly using TypeScript and Java, which is a nice combination for me. You may know me from the JFol, where I gave a presentation on blockchain. I am AWS community leader for the Dutch AWS user group, and I'm looking forward to tonight. And now, Pete, tell
Yes,
us.
hello everyone. Thank you. I am Piet. I'm cloud consultant also at Luminous. My main activities are advising clients on cloud migration and transformation journeys. And like Rode, I'm still relatively new to this user group, and also very excited to be here. And I also can't wait for more get-togethers like our local AWS Community Day in September. Okay, on to today's program. In a few minutes, Kyle Davis, Senior Developer Advocate OpenSearch at AWS, will join us. And Kyle will tell us about Amazon OpenSearch, which just saw this week its official release. And in this session, you'll learn about the components of OpenSearch, what they do, and what problems they can solve. And we'll also cover the transition from OpenDistro, from Elasticsearch to OpenSearch, and how you can get involved in the project. And when Kyle is done presenting and we have asked him our questions, we will have a short break. And then Byron will take over. Byron from Luminous will cover migrating from Elasticsearch to Amazon's managed offerings. And he will show us what the differences are between Elasticsearch and its extra features in Amazon OpenSearch, and explain how he migrated one of his customers from Elasticsearch to the AWS managed one. Demos are included, I heard, so this should be exciting. Before we start, we do have some rules. If you want to explain them, Rode.
Yes, of course. We have a code of conduct, which you can read on our community website. In short, make sure everyone here, even in this virtual space, is welcomed and feels safe. If you have any remarks or questions, please use the YouTube or Twitch chat channels. And we will summarize your and our own questions at the end of each talk. So feel free to ask away using the chat channels. Please do. But now we're on to our first speaker, which is Kyle Davis.
Hi
Hey,
there.
Kyle, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you here. Like we talked about before, you just want to dive right in. So the stage is yours. Good luck, and we'll see you afterwards with our questions.
Sure thing. Okay, let's see. Can you folks see my screen? Hopefully. Should be a website. Yeah, looks like it. Okay. And I'll switch over to my presentation here. All right, can you see the presentation? Everything look good? Okay. So first up, let's go back and talk about the presentation that you'll hear. What is OpenSearch? This is something that I've been talking a lot about, but specifically now I can talk even more about it because we are GA on this. So before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Kyle Davis, as I've been introduced. I'm the Senior Developer Advocate for OpenSearch at AWS. Now, I usually give my biography in numbers. So let's talk a little bit about these different numbers that I have on the screen. 304. I've been at AWS for 304 days today. And it's a lot has changed in that amount of time. And we'll go over all the change during the presentation. 3 is the number of different search engines I've worked with in the past. So search is one of the domains that I really find interesting. And then 6 is the number of releases I've been with OpenSearch / its preceding products. And 53 degrees north. That's where I live. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is the northernmost city in Canada. And yeah, it gets pretty cold here. Today is not like that. It's about 35 degrees Celsius. and there's forest fires. So it's always an adventure. And then 8, since I usually give this presentation to Americans, and in Canada we use both, 8 is the number of pounds my dog weighs, which is about 2.5 kilograms if I do the conversion correctly. I usually tell that, especially when I'm doing these virtual presentations, because he may jump into frame, you may hear him bark, and if you follow me on social media, you'll definitely see my little dog. He's an Italian Greyhound. His name is Mr. Button. So if he makes an appearance, don't be surprised. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda we'll talk about today. We'll talk about the history of OpenSearch, what's in OpenSearch, the differences that you might find between OpenSearch and some other products, what's coming along in the pipeline, and then how you can join in and contribute. So before I begin, I want to just go over the definition. And I don't tend to read slides directly, but I do read this slide directly because every word is important. OpenSearch is a community-driven open source search and analytics suite derived from the Apache 2.0 licensed Elasticsearch 7.10.2 and Kibana 7.10.2. It consists of a search engine daemon, OpenSearch, a visualization user interface, OpenSearch dashboards, as well as a series of functionality, adding plugins and tools. So all those have meaning, and I'll touch on every bit of this throughout the presentation, but this is a summary of everything you need to know, but do know that those words mean a whole lot. So going forward, let's talk a little about the history of OpenSearch, and I'm just going to check on something real quick. Okay, cool. History of OpenSearch is something that most time you talk about software, you don't talk about history, but in this case, I think it's really, really relevant considering OpenSearch 1.0 came out on Monday. For those of you who don't know, in the beginning, there was Elasticsearch, which came out about 10 years ago, and then Kibana, which came a little after that. And they started out as open source software. So they were Apache 2 licensed. And the company that surrounds Elasticsearch and Kibana, they built them in as a kind of pluggable architecture. And part of their business model is selling different things that plug into it. And that's fine. That's great. I don't fault anybody for having that business model. As a service, AWS decided that they wanted to provide Elasticsearch as a service and Kibana as a service. And because of that, they needed to build out some extra things that customers want. These are things like security, some very things that would be almost impossible to use service without security, right? And index management. And we'll get into what all these things mean later, but these are things that were absolutely needed. And so the service came out about 2015, and we got a lot of requests from people who were actually looking to run the same software either in the cloud on AWS, or in their own infrastructure or self-managing. So they needed something that was the same between those two areas. And there's a lot of customers as well that wanted to use Elasticsearch and Kibana, but they could not pay for it because of licensing reasons, right? Like a lot of companies have, you can use these following licenses, and otherwise it's not allowed. So in 2019, Amazon released OpenDistro for Elasticsearch. And OpenDistro for Elasticsearch is the basis for Amazon Elasticsearch service, but it basically is the open source Elasticsearch in Kibana, completely unmodified, with additional plugins that are plugged into both Elasticsearch and Kibana and a series of tools, and then an installer for all that. So that's all OpenDistro was, right? I am talking in past tense here, and you'll see why. So OpenDistro was around for several years, and actually it was hired to work with OpenDistro. And it's all Apache 2 licensed. So for those who had problems in a situation where they could not run, Elasticsearch or some of this additional freely available but not open source plugins, which Elastic started to provide, this was an option for a lot of folks. Now, let's fast forward to January of 2021. The company behind Elasticsearch and Kibana said, guess what? We're no longer going to have an open source version. So after version 7.10.2, we're discontinuing open source Elasticsearch and Kibana. So functionally, there is no new Elasticsearch and Kibana open source since January. Now, that was a problem for a lot of people because they needed some sort of open source option. It was a problem for Amazon as well. Amazon wasn't certainly going to have the licensed version that would not have worked for the service or for our users, right? Because no one wants to pay for the service and then pay for an additional license on top of that, right? That just wasn't something that was an option. So after a lot of deliberations, they decided to fork the software. And so in January 2021, there was a blog post that came out and said we're forking. Along the same time, basically the plugins and tools that made up OpenDistro were then made to work with this forked version of Elasticsearch and Kibana, and the OpenDistro for Elasticsearch project is no longer being developed. So these ingredients together have created OpenSearch. And OpenSearch is a kind of all-inclusive name for something. So I want to go over what that name means, because this is a point of confusion for a lot of folks. OpenSearch versus OpenSearch project. So with a lot of things, and this was something that we saw with Elasticsearch, people would say, oh, I use Elasticsearch, when they actually meant they were using Elasticsearch and Kibana. We have a similar pattern. Basically, there's the OpenSearch project, and that can either mean all the components of OpenSearch, or like the GitHub organization that has all the different parts in it. Or you could say I use OpenSearch, and you could also mean all those components as well. But really specifically, if you're saying I use OpenSearch, you're just meaning the search daemon. So it's just the part that is doing the indexing of data. But for shorthand, people will just say OpenSearch. So we have to kind of go with it. The other point of confusion in the name is, and this goes back to that old adage that naming is hard, is that in 2005, there was a format for syndication and aggregation of web results for web browsers called OpenSearch. And in 2021, we have this distributed search engine based on Lucene, which we're talking about today, and they have the same name. Well, why is that? Both of those are projects that originated at Amazon. So the history here is kind of interesting. For those of you who don't know, Amazon is based, its offices all over the world, of course, but its kind of headquarters is in Seattle. But early on, there was a project called A9, and A9 was a search engine just like you would see with Yahoo or Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever. And the A9 offices were in California, and basically out of A9 came CloudSearch, the first version of that, which was an early AWS service. After a while, the A9 technology was then taken out of CloudSearch, and they released a version on Solar, which is also based on Apache Lucene. And that was still based out of the kind of same group, the same working group that did A9, but it was now an AWS service. And then later, that same group did Amazon Elasticsearch service. And out of that came OpenDistro, as we discussed earlier. And then out of that came OpenSearch, 2021. So there's actually a lot of connective threads between the 2005 OpenSearch and the 2021 OpenSearch, but they are completely independent things that coexist using the same name. You will still do a search for OpenSearch, and you go, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the syndication format? It's pretty easy most of the time to determine between those, but that is a point of confusion, especially for those people who would use both. We have some librarians who use both. So what actually happened when we decided to say, let's fork Elasticsearch and Kibana? So the first thing was removing all the proprietary bits. So unlike a lot of open source projects where if you want to fork, you just go to GitHub and you move your mouse up to the little green button and say fork this. That's not the scenario that could be done with Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch, as I mentioned earlier, had some parts that were Apache 2.0 licensed and some parts that were under the Elastic license. And in January 2021, they actually changed from having some parts being Apache 2 and some parts being Elastic license. And then in January 2021, they said, actually, it's going to be SSPL, which is a non-open source, but source available license. You could probably call it that. It is a proprietary license from Apache 2 to SSPL, and then also had the Elastic license. Consequently of all this is that you had this repo that was mixed. It had some things that were Elastic licensed in it, some things that were Apache 2.0 licensed, because we took the last version that was Apache 2 licensed. And a lot of those things were called XPack, and these are some features that may have been included for no cost, but they weren't open source software. So we had to remove those. They were proprietary. We had to get rid of all the branding that was in it. So because OpenSearch is a distinct product, we had to rename everything. So a lot of the branding had to be removed. There was actually embedded marketing material in Kibana. So in that case, there were scenarios even where you would run some queries and it would say maybe you want to upgrade for a better experience to this version of Elasticsearch or Kibana. So we had to remove all that sort of stuff. There was phone home and telemetry data collection that was occurring that had to all be removed. There was licensed maps that were involved in Kibana. Those were removed. Actually, they were removed in Open Distro, but we had to remove all vestiges of those in the software, and we replaced those with something that we could license more friendly in a more friendly way. So we had a lot of stuff to do there. So this is all these proprietary things that were just deeply embedded in the code base. And the code base of Elasticsearch in Kibana is gigantic. It's a very intimidatingly large code base. So there was a lot of removal on that. We had to build entirely new build processes. Those were something that were linked to the previous company's infrastructure, so that had to be done fresh. We had to make new tests for most of the stuff. We could carry forward some, but not all. We had to have new documentation for this because the documentation was built in a way that didn't make a lot of sense for us to move forward with it. And we had to give it a name, of course, and that's where OpenSearch comes in. So where does this leave us? OpenSearch is now top to bottom Apache 2.0 licensed, which gives you all the freedoms you might expect. You can use, modify, extend, embed, monetize, resell, make it part of a product, all that stuff. So you have a lot of freedoms that are given to you by the Apache 2 license. So OpenSearch dashboards, the plugins, all the tools are all Apache 2 licensed. Now, I can't say the entire project is because there's one thing that's BSD3 clause licensed, and that's the website for the whole project. It has a different history to it. So these are all things that are available and use very accepted open source licenses. So that's the history, and that's kind of where we are right now. But let's talk about like what's in OpenSearch. And this is, for those of you probably who are interested in search technologies, as much as we review, and I will go over this pretty quickly, but it is important to know what's in this and kind of how it all fits together. So OpenSearch is a distributed search engine. That means that it can exist across multiple nodes in a cluster, and it's designed for index-based searching as opposed to document-based searching. You interact with it via REST API. So you are doing the same HTTP, get, post, delete, that sort of thing, and then you supply JSON to that for the most part. We'll get into how that differs a little bit. It performs the indexing and storage of data, and those are two separate processes in OpenSearch. Because this is a search engine, its main superpowers are in the indexing world, not the storage world. Consequently, you wouldn't really use it as a database generally. You can use it to index other databases, or you can use it to do things like this, but some of the guarantees are different than a traditional database. It's built in Java using Lucene, and Lucene is this kind of search library. It might be a bit reductive to even call it a library. It's a powerhouse of search that powers a lot of different search technologies across the world, like Solr, for example. And it has various types of nodes inside of it. So you've got data nodes, main nodes, and I'll talk to you a little bit about this word that's kind of grayed out here. Coordinating nodes, ingest nodes, these all serve a separate purpose in these larger clusters. So that's OpenSearch. And then OpenSearch dashboards, which is the replacement for Kibana in this fork. It's a browser-based UI and visualization system for OpenSearch specifically. It has built-in charts and visualizations that allow you to really see what's going on with your data, not just get raw data out of it. You can compose those charts and tables into dashboards, so you can visualize that and give, everybody wants a dashboard for everything, it seems, these days, and you can compose those and have that in OpenSearch dashboards. You can interact with OpenSearch using DQL or with the query DSL, which is the kind of most common way of interacting with OpenSearch. And it is built in TypeScript. So while OpenSearch is built in Java, this is built in TypeScript. So kind of a classic thing, because this is a more front-end oriented system, and the Java is more of a kind of back-end oriented system. So lots of neat stuff here. So those are two main components that you have there. And then now we're going to get into all the pieces that we would call plugins and tools, and the subsequent things from here all derive from the open distro side. So the first thing to know, and this is kind of the cornerstone of everything we have here, is the security and access control, otherwise known as security plugin. This is kind of, without this, none of the other plugins would really, they all kind of interact with the security and access control. So it's really the heart of some of the special features that you would see if you're just coming from Elasticsearch over. It provides node-to-node encryption. Your authentication and authorization basically come from this. So out of the box, you can do basic authentication, so you can log in as a user and that sort of thing, but you have all sorts of ways you can authenticate in that are not based just in the system itself. So other ways you can integrate in. Use role-based access control, and if you've ever used any other type of access control, and then you start using role-based access control, it's one of those things you think about and you think, how did I live without this? And then it has access level restrictions based on index field or field, which is really cool actually, and it allows you to let different users see different things, right? So really important and actually super powerful. I feel like every time I dive into that, I'll learn something new and some other pattern that I could use. It has built-in audit logging for your cluster. So if you want to see who's using what when, it does that and then allows you to kind of trace back through who's been accessing things. And it provides the dashboard multi-tenancy, so you can have OpenSearch dashboards viewing different things and different users having different experiences based on their tenancy. So that's security and access control. Then we have a number of query languages. We have Query DSL, which is kind of the classic. It is a great, powerful query language, but it's a little bit of a pain. From my perspective, I've been using JSON for years and years and years, and I still struggle to try to match all my curly braces and my quote marks. And there's a lot of places you can go wrong there. And I think if you know where you want to go, it's not hard to write the query. But if you don't know where you want to go with your query when you start it, it's a really hard place to start. The other way that you can access query your data is through OpenSearch SQL, which is SQL you know and love. And it's pretty much a relatively close to standard SQL dialect. We have ODBC and JDBC drivers as well. They're not out right now for OpenSearch. They were available for OpenDistro. Within a few weeks, I would think it would be out for OpenSearch. But this is classic. We all learned this, and it's really accessible for a lot of people. It's a little bit of a strange fit, given it's a very structured language, and the data in OpenSearch can be quite unstructured. So there is a little bit of a strange match in my mind here, but it's super useful if you just want to dive in and do a quick ad hoc query and you don't want to think about anything else. And the newest member here is Piped Processing Language, PPL is what we call it. And it is very similar to Unix pipes, where you're taking one thing, you're defining it, and you're using a pipe to kind of pipe data from one part of the pipeline to the next. So it's really powerful when you're trying to iteratively build a query. So I'm most comfortable with this when I say, okay, I look at the data, I query something, I look at the data, and I apply more filters to it and more filters to it. And it's a really natural way of doing that. Now on the screen, there are 3 queries that all do functionally the same thing. So you can really see how they differ. Another important aspect of OpenSearch is the alerting functionality. This is basically where you run a query on a particular schedule, and you do this basically with cron patterns. Every 5 minutes, you run a query, and then you trigger an alert based on that condition. So when n number of errors occur based on the query in a single hour, so you can kind of define those characteristics, and then when it meets the trigger event, it sends you a message or sends a message to a webhook or like Slack or some other different services. But that's great if you want to alert, say, a human to do something because something looks out of whack. And then we get into a kind of I guess sister to this is anomaly detection. Basically, this is an unsupervised machine learning algorithm based on random cut forest that's designed to find unusual data. So basically, in this, you create detectors. Those detectors basically have features, and the features are what you're checking for, usually aggregation, and you observe the results in OpenSearch dashboards, and then you set up alerts based on that using the alerting plugin, and you can adjust and manage those detectors. But the difference here is this is really great if you don't know what you're looking for. So as an example, with alerting, you can say, I know that if I reach past the thresholds, it's going to be a problem. With anomaly detection, if you have a situation where you don't know what your threshold is, or your data will slowly move up and down, for example, you can say, whenever I reach functionally a spike or a dip, that's when an alert happens. And you don't have to define those. So it's very handy to not have to make very explicit definitions. Also built into OpenSearch is index state management. So basically, you manage indices based on their properties. You define those policies based on what you want to happen, and then a state transition occurs. So as an example, you would say, hey, when a query when a index reaches 30 days old, make it read-only, and delete it when it gets to 90 days. So you set up these policies, and they really inform how it's going to, function inside your cluster. So as an example, you may have data that it's not very valuable after a certain amount of time, and you don't need to manually do things, and it can kind of create new indices as needed and delete indices when they're not needed. Then we can look at notebooks. Notebooks is another interesting thing. Basically, this allows you to create narratives with different pieces of information that you would have in OpenSearch, and then you can add paragraphs of words to this. So the visualizations are your typical visualizations in OpenSearch. You have like maps and charts and data being like data tables, and then you add paragraphs to this. And the key use case here is when you have a notebook, it's not like a Python notebook or anything like this. This is more of a way to take the data and generate something that somebody who doesn't look at a dashboard every day could understand. So if you have, for example, you need to create a root cause analysis of a issue that occurred in your architecture, this would be a great way to do that. So you could then hand this off to, say, your boss, and they could say, okay, I see where you've put this data here, you put this chart here, and you describe each one of them below, providing that extra context. A similar feature, and these often get confused. Reports and notebooks kind of sound the same, but they're actually quite different. This is a way to share your data outside of somebody who would have access to OpenSearch dashboards. So you take your data and visualizations, and then you can export it to PDF, PNG, or CSV files for just the data. And you can set these up to be created on demand or just on a schedule. So let's say you need to report something, the stability of your service every week on a Monday morning. You can set it up where it will just, create that Monday morning before you come in for the day. Async search is a relatively new thing to OpenSearch and OpenDistro. It came in one of the last versions of OpenDistro. This allows you to make long-running queries to run in the background, and you don't have to worry about if your client disconnects or anything like that. And then instead of having to wait for that data, you can kind of see the data as it comes in. So it may be enough for you to see the first 20 results to know that you need to keep on watching it, or maybe you can ignore it. So if not, it will say you would get the whole results back asynchronously, and then you wouldn't have to worry to sit there and wait for it to run, or if you were to get disconnected, it wouldn't be a problem. And a couple other features is that we have here, KNN. KNN is great for building recommendation engines. It's K nearest neighbors. Also good for fraud detection and image recognition. You basically take data represented as vectors, and then you can put it through the algorithm, which it's based on, which is a hierarchical navigable small world graph. So for a lot of use cases, it's very good. For a lot of like traditional log-based use cases, with the exception of fraud detection, it's a little bit of an odd fit, but it would kind of go more into those who are using it for actual search rather than log analytics. Trace analytics is also a newer thing that we've added to the last versions of OpenDistro, in that they are subsequently in OpenSearch. They allow you to visualize data across complex architectures, aka microservices. It supports OpenTelemetry formats, and it's built to work with Data Prepper. Now, Data Prepper is an aggregator for the OpenSearch projects built by the OpenSearch project team, similar in function somewhat to Logstash, but geared specifically for observability. And so that's something that is pretty new, and I won't touch on it too deeply here because it is kind of a side project of the entire effort by the team. And of course, you can bring in data from other sources. But so that's the overview, and a very long overview of all the different pieces that are put together to make up OpenSearch. So the project is pretty wide-reaching. Now, for a lot of people, they don't have a brand new project, and that brand new project is they're taking a project and bringing it in from somewhere else, right? So what they really want to know is what's the differences between things I'm running before OpenDistro, for example, or Elasticsearch, for example, and OpenSearch 1.0. So how do you move to OpenSearch? Well, when the project started, we had a number of goals. It really need to be just as easy as upgrading from another version. It need to be wire compatible with Elasticsearch, the last version of Elasticsearch we could support. And we want to make sure that we gave users a significant runway before any breaking changes happened. So let's talk about upgrading, how you get there. Right now it's tested for sure for OpenDistro 1.13, which is using Elasticsearch 7.10.2. And there's three real ways you can do this. You can do a snapshot upgrade. So effectively with that, you would take your data in, let's say OpenDistro, take a snapshot of it, and then add that snapshot to a new OpenSearch cluster. Very straightforward. However, that does have some drawbacks. As you might imagine, any tools or anything that's being connected with this would have to update their endpoint, because those two different clusters will have different endpoints. So that's called a snapshot upgrade. Then you have a restart upgrade. And a restart upgrade, basically, you take your existing cluster, you stop all indexing, you turn it off, you do the upgrade manually, node by node, and then you restart it as OpenSearch. So the upgrade is basically going from Elasticsearch to OpenSearch. And then finally, you have a rolling upgrade. Very similar start. You stop all indexing to your cluster, and then node by node, you turn the different pieces from being Elasticsearch nodes to being OpenSearch nodes, and then they join in the cluster, and eventually you end up with a cluster that's all OpenSearch. So with the restart, it has, so the middle kind of here, basically you do have time where your cluster is down. The rolling, your cluster can still be up and generally can still respond to searching, but it's not recommended that you would do any indexing during that time. It could be quite unpredictable, your results. So that's how you upgrade. So this is really very similar to how you'd upgrade any cluster, right? If you're going from one version to another. The next thing to know is about wire compatibility. It's well known that Elasticsearch has a number of tools that work with it. And we wanted to be able to use as many of those tools as possible. So for the most part, and I'll get into the exceptions to this, if it works with Elasticsearch 7.10.2, it should work with OpenSearch 1.x. So 1.0 on to whatever the final version of the 1x line is. Now, here are the exceptions. There are certainly pieces of software out there that do version checking. Out of the box, OpenSearch reports as OpenSearch 1.0, and these tools sometimes will naively check the version number and not anything else. And then the tool would say, well, I don't support Elasticsearch 1.0, because it'll assume if it sees 1.0, it's thinking that it's Elasticsearch 1.0. So there is a way that you can enable version spoofing that will report as 7.10.2. If you don't need it, don't turn that on. So good to know that it's there, and for certain things you might want it, but certainly it's not something that every user will need. Now, the other kind of thing here is there are tools that do license checks, and that sees if it's a authorized version of Elasticsearch or a licensed version of Elasticsearch. So this is open source, and there is no concept of licensing. This is a pure open source project, so OpenSearch will not connect to something that does a license check. The license check will fail. Now, you would expect that out of things that are kind of specifically designed to work with that, but there have been some things that have recently come out that are outside the purview of the OpenSearch project. For example, if you use Logstash, which is an aggregator that's typically used with Elasticsearch, among other pieces of software, the Elasticsearch output plugin did add recently a license check to it. So thankfully, Logstash is built in a way that you have Logstash itself and then a series of output plugins. And those output plugins can go to a number of different things. And you can go to like Redis, for example. So it's not just unique to Elasticsearch, but they have put in this open source piece of software a license check for connecting to a licensed piece of software, which is a little unusual. But the nice thing is there is an easy way around that. There is now an OpenSearch output plugin that you can get on GitHub, and that will allow you to connect to Logstash. So that's just functionally one other step, and we're actually working on putting together a specific way for you to do that on your own and get everything you need, and just as simple as running Logstash with the Elasticsearch output plugin. So just kind of a bundled system for that. Now, another thing that has license checks as of recently is Beats. So that's an agent for Elasticsearch. That is not something that's built in a way that is modular. So there's no concept of like an output plugin. So right now, I would say the best thing you can do is stay on 7.12.1, I should say, which is the last version that does not have the license checks. So there's not right now. There's not an effort at Amazon to or anywhere that I know of to fork Beats. Maybe someone will come forward, but I would consider alternatives, especially if you're in a greenfield and you're not already relying on Beats. Something like FluentBit would be something that you might want to consider. So the one thing I will note is if you're using Beats with Logstash, which is pretty common, then this is not necessarily an issue because the only thing that's really connecting to OpenSearch would be Logstash. So just think about your architecture here. You may not be affected by the license checks and Beats. And that would only be if somebody's connecting Beats directly to OpenSearch. So that's the compatibility. Let's talk about breaking changes. Breaking changes are something that we understand are quite difficult to deal with. We're using semantic versioning. So that means that breaking changes will come when there is a major version number change. So there'll be no breaking changes in 1.x. If there is, it's wholly unintentional and we'll fix it. So OpenSearch 2.0 will introduce breaking changes. That's just by nature of what 2.0 means, right? That brings up the natural question of divergence. How are these things going to be different, right? So some people have asked us, when insert Elasticsearch version, let's say 8, 9, 10, or some future version that's not out yet, will you have compatibility with that? And it's an interesting question because really the features are driven by the community. So what that means is basically if the community says, they want something, that's what's going to really drive us in their project. So it's totally possible that the community will say, I want this feature and that is in a newer version of Elasticsearch or something, and that's okay. We'll do our best to do that. The implementation might be different, for sure. The implementation might be the same. The goal is not to make the implementation the same. That's not just like to keep up with the project. That's not the goal. So they are two distinct projects, and we expect as time goes on that they will drift apart in their implementations of things. And certainly, we think that people will go crazy with OpenSearch, and it will be things that will have some really great features that won't be existing in Elasticsearch. So that's just the nature of a fork, right? So they'll diverge. So now I've talked about the differences. Let's talk about what's coming up, and I've hinted at some of these things already. So OpenSearch is a open source project, and this gives us a lot of freedom about things. We can talk about roadmap very openly. So this is the timeline. We have reached OpenSearch GA 1.0, which is the biggest milestone we've had. We've been working on it for 6 months, and it came up true this Monday. OpenSearch 1.1 will come out, and the way we're releasing things is an idea called a release train. So as things are, as the release comes close, we'll see what made it to the release and put everything into that, and then we'll move on to the next one as time goes on. So it's more time-based than particular things that we're hitting on our roadmap. So 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, they're going to come kind of at the end of September, in October, and then at the end of November. So you're seeing we're going on approximately a monthly cadence here. The other thing to realize is December is kind of a month that no one is really that engaged in. So, it's going to be hard for us to meet all those different pieces. So we're not going to do anything in December, but in January, we're planning 2.0, so 2022. If you want to know more about this, we have a public roadmap, and we work entirely from a public roadmap. So the address is on the screen, and it's available on our website, which I'll talk about in a moment. And you can see exactly what's happening at any given time. And you can see the dates that I've talked about are on here as well. Finally, how do you contribute? It's open source through and through, and that's a really important part of the project. We love all contributions. And really, we consider code to be only one type of contribution. If we only had code contributions, the project would not be that good. So we consider contributors people who participate on our forums. We have a very active forum, and this is a great place to provide your feedback and have conversations that might spur ideas on other people. So that's contribution. Certainly commenting on issues in pull requests on GitHub, that's excellent contribution. So let your feelings known about stuff and let your expertise known. Working on documentation, our documentation is open source, and if you can add your expertise to it, that's great. You can write a blog post. We are through and through open source. So opensearch.org is our website, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But if you want to write a blog post, how you do that is through a pull request. We are really, the pull request is kind of the atomic unit of contribution to add something to almost anything in the project. So we'll work with you to make sure it gets in the right format and excuse me, is meeting all the standards we need to meet for it to be a blog post. So about opensearch.org, it's really important. We have everything you need to know about the project on that. We have an event schedule. We have bi-weekly community meetings we'd love for you to join. We have links to our forums, which I talked a little bit about. Really great to get answers on things, find out what other users are doing. All the downloads are available on opensearch.org, so you can look and find out what's available in different formats and different artifacts that we have for you to use. Our documentation is accessible there, and it's getting bigger every single day. Of course, our blog is quite technical, and it's a great place to learn a lot of different things. And links to all of our GitHub repos. There's over 20 GitHub repos in the project, so you can find links to all those from opensearch.org. And I did want to just spend a couple seconds on, here's opensearch.org. You can see here, we have all the information here, the blogs on this side. Our documentation is in the middle, and you can see the events and how to get started. That's the most important one. You can see how to download and get this all ready. All right, so I think it's time for questions, if anybody has any.
Yes, thanks a lot, Kyle. That was really interesting. We have some questions from the chats. Okay. One question is, does Amazon plan implementing some of the orchestration features from Elastic Cloud Enterprise?
It's a good question. I don't think it's something that it would be directly something we would try to keep up with. It's kind of that, are we trying to keep up with a version? No, not necessarily. Of course, orchestration is important, and I know there's a lot of people working on, say, Kubernetes orchestration, things like that. So I don't think we try to match feature for feature or anything that's on any other, Elastic Cloud or anything like that.
Okay, I think that's a good answer, and else we will hear it, see it in the chat, I think. And another question is, do you know if there will be easier integrations with AWS services, e.g. move indices to S3 or Glacier after they are marked as frozen?
That's a good question. And one of the things I want to point out here is, if those features are built, I have not heard of anybody working on those particular features. We want to be very vendor independent. So we're not going to implement things that are specific to Amazon just because the majority of the engineers are Amazon here. So, that being said, we want to make sure that if somebody is running on GCP or is running on Azure or is running on any cloud service, that the features we hit first are the ones that apply to the most number of users. So while those particular features may come out, I've not heard anything particularly from my side, we'd want to do that in a way that's vendor neutral.
Okay, thanks a lot. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Kyle. And on behalf of our community, I think I can say we've learned a lot. I wish you a very nice day, and hopefully we will see you again someday.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
So
Kyle.
let's
Have a
go
good
to
day.
the break.
Yes, we're back.
Yes, hello again. Thank you. And now on to our second speaker of the day, which is Byron Forbach, who is currently in Sweden on a holiday with his parents-in-law.
Yep. Yes. Start?
And yes, you may start, please.
Okay, sure. I'll share my screen. One sec. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. Yes, well, hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Byron Vorbach. I'm a search lead and search and data engineer at Luminous. I've been working for about 9 years, and about 7 of those have been in search. Mostly my experience is in e-commerce, legal, and patents. But next to working in different domains, I really like working with new technologies as well, which really fits the current talk, actually. And if you want to look me up, here are the links. Now, you maybe noticed from the first slides and from the Meetup text before that this talk was going to be about open distro for Elasticsearch. And I guess most of the people that are here during this talk might wonder, open distro for Elasticsearch? Didn't we just have a talk about OpenSearch and how it's going to replace open distro? Yeah, that's the case. So a few weeks ago, when we were drafting up the idea for this presentation, I went on holiday to Sweden, as what I just mentioned. And suddenly this Monday, 1.0 dropped for OpenSearch, which made me sort of like change my setup. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a bit about both. So I'm going to be handling some things about open distro, what we've been doing with clients and how we've been using it. But since open distro or OpenSearch is out right now, I actually already wanted to do some of the demos that I was supposed to do in open distro, actually just do them in OpenSearch. So maybe on top of Kyle's talk, which was great just before, maybe we get some actual see what it looks like. All right, so let's get started. I have been using open distro for a few months now. Mainly we started using it as part of the Amazon Elasticsearch service, which is one way of using open distro. But there are a couple of ways. So first, for setting up, there's a few setups you could do, of course. Like you either have your local setup, you have your setup on the server, or you have your setup in the cloud. And now this slide is still for open distro, but I will also cover a bit about OpenSearch. So for local setup in open distro, you could either install the Windows version, Linux version, or the Dockerized version. And you can see that it's like dark and underlined because that's the one I'm going to be showing and be using today. For server, you had Debian package, RPM package, and you could also use Docker. And for the cloud, you could run Amazon Elasticsearch Service or EC2 within Amazon Machine Image, or you could run open distro in Fargate. But today I will show you both. So I will show you running OpenSearch in Docker, and I will show you running AES, so Amazon Elasticsearch Service in AWS. So first, setting up local. Kyle already mentioned you can download the Docker Compose and just start it up. So what I'll be doing is I would like to demo a lot of things. So I'm going to be switching back and forth between my presentation a lot. And now it's the first time. So I downloaded the Docker Compose, which is here in my OpenSearch folder. And I will just do a Docker Compose up, which actually will just start up 2 OpenSearch nodes and 1 OpenSearch dashboards node. Which I already downloaded the images, so this will go pretty fast. And then we will actually have it running in just a few seconds. And we will be using this version. Oh, don't look at ourselves. We can actually wait a second and move our screen over here. And it will tell us it's not ready yet, but now it's not ready. And we will have OpenSearch running. All right, that's cool. That went pretty quick. So let's go back. If you're wondering why I look really hot, even though I'm actually in Sweden, it's like the craziest weather here. It's 32 degrees and sunny, which is not something I expected when I was going over here for holiday, so bear with me for the heat, please. And the next one is setting up in the cloud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to set up an Amazon Elasticsearch service, which is running open distro, which will in the future actually be replaced by the OpenSearch service. Which maybe, I don't know if Kyle can maybe later come back and tell us if there is any planned date for that, because I'm not too sure. I can't really find when that is going to be that. But let's do that as well. So what I want to do is I want to open up our console in AWS. I think most of the people here will have done this before, or at least know how this works. I'm using the latest version of Mac OS X, so I can use the 2-factor in here. And let's go to Elasticsearch Service. We can create a domain here, and I will walk you through the steps of actually pretty quickly start this up and start trying this out. And hopefully at the end of my talk, we can quickly go back here and see that everything is running properly. So when you start up a cluster at AWS, they have to provision the cluster, and it can sometimes take either from 5 minutes to half an hour to sometimes it may be even longer. So we'll see how fast it goes today. So we'll choose for deployment type, we will choose development and testing, since we're only going to be needing one availability zone. And then we can choose an Elasticsearch version that the version of OpenDistro is going to be based on. As Kyle mentioned before, 7.10 is the latest, so we'll also be using that version. Then one of the most important parts, choosing your Elasticsearch domain name. And for today, we'll just use AWS Meetup. Now for the next endpoint, the next point you can choose if you want to enable a custom endpoint. So by default, AWS will generate a domain for you to reach your Amazon Elasticsearch service. But if you already have like your own AWS certificate and you want to expose it under your own name, you can do that here, which we'll not be doing for now. Auto-tune is a feature that is delivered by AWS for auto-tuning heap and cache configuration on the fly. So actually, Amazon will analyze your cache statistics and your heap statistics, and will change or will ask you if you want them to automatically change those settings for you on the fly, which is a cool feature. I haven't used it too much, but there are two types of changes they can do. So like I said, the JVM, which require actual downtime or actual restart of the service. So you will need a maintenance window for that. But it can also automatically configure the cache sizes, which it does automatically. So that's pretty neat. Then the next configuration is about which kind of nodes you want to use. So there are a few common setups. So for development and testing, it's nice to have one node. And you can go over another page, somewhere in the AWS page, where you will see actual the resources under each node. So right now, it's maybe a bit hard to see which nodes are sufficient for the setup you want to use. But what I do recommend is if you just want to start out with either the OpenDistro and AWS, to actually go with a T3 small node. So the upside of this one is actually that it comes with some AWS free tier. So you don't have to pay directly a lot of money for actually running just a small instance, just to play around with it and see how it works. The only downside about this is that it doesn't have too much resources, and it sometimes takes a while for it to be set up. But for now, I think we can leave it at the T3, and then we'll see if it actually spins up in the time of this meetup. So we choose one node. We can configure how much storage we want per node. Well, again, since this is a development cluster, I don't think we'll need more than 10 gigs, so we can leave that on default. And we also really don't need the dedicated master nodes. I think we can leave that on for now, but off for now. But if you're moving to production, it's actually smart to think about having like a dedicated master setup and a couple more data nodes, just to make sure that you have the right and proper cluster setup. So let's go to the next page, which actually allows us to control a bit more about how to access it and do some more security config. Now, this is an important choice, and it's more about whether you want to be able to access Elasticsearch straight from the internet, or if you wanted to use it for your other services so that only they can connect to it inside AWS. So for now, we want to do public access because we want to reach it from my computer where I'm at right now, and we don't need to reach it just from an AWS service. All right, the next step, like Kyle mentioned before, OpenDistro came with a few plugins that were lacking from the basic OpenSearch version from Elastic. So if you wanted security for Elasticsearch, you actually had to take a license. But now here for OpenDistro, we can actually choose a lot of defaults already straight out of the box. So we're going to have fine-grained access control. And we can give one user the master, like the admin rights for the whole Elastic or OpenDistro. But for now, we're going to create a master user, which is something where we give a username and password so we can access Kibana ourselves. And here we call the master username admin, and we'll do master password, which has to be super secure. Oh no, that could be not so secure. I can type it right. There we go. And then you have some other options. So by default, you can choose during setup to actually pre-configure Elasticsearch and Kibana for SAML authentication. So if you have your own identity providers and you want to link them so that you can log in with your own SSO in Kibana, you can already prepare this SAML authentication so that when you set it up, you just have to take a few steps to actually link that one to your own identity provider. Another thing is Amazon Cognito authentication, which is Amazon service for identity providing, which we'll also not be using right now. And then we have to define an access policy. So the access policy defines of how are we going to reach this cluster and who is allowed to actually reach it. So what we're going to do is you can either choose your own access policies, or you can copy them from another domain, or you can allow open access, which you maybe never want to do. You at least want to put some bounds on who can reach it and whatnot. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an IPv4 address, which I would put at my own address. So only from my IP, I can actually reach this instance. And I will go to checkip.amazon.aws.com. Copy my IP address, paste it in, and say allow. Now I'm the only one from this network that is able to reach this OpenDistro instance. And then there are some features about encryption, which are all on by default as soon as you choose fine-grained access control. So if you want fine-grained access control, which is something you want, you will have the encryption features on by default. And that is mostly it. There are some optional settings if you already want to change like field data cache allocation or the max clause count. If you're more an advanced user and you know you're going to have huge queries, then maybe you already want to up these values. Otherwise, you can always do that later. And then as a last step, you can add some tags, which is common throughout AWS if you want to tag your deployments. But we don't have to do that right now. So let's click next, and we get a small little review. And we scroll down, we can see our access policy, which is allow on this source IP. And then we say confirm. Then we let it load for a sec. Well, I can remember this password, I think. So, and we have successfully created our Elasticsearch domain, which is now in the state of loading. Now, this loading state can be there for a while. I guess with this time we'll see how long it will take. We're now at 20:03. So let's continue with the presentation and then later come back here. There. So we first set up the Docker Compose one, which is now running in my background, which is OpenSearch. And now we started up Amazon Elasticsearch service on AWS, which is still running OpenDistro. So let's look at some features. Kyle already mentioned a few, and what I want to do now is just to dive a little bit deeper in them and show you how you can set them up and how you can use them to your advantage. So first one is security. Oh, there's still OpenDistro. I'm in OpenSearch. Well, first we're going to be talking about security. I don't think I have to explain what it is, but some of the features that I want to show is the document level security and the field masking, which is kind of neat in some situations. And what I want to do is I want to give you a use case, and based on the use case, implement the feature, and then show you that it actually works. So our first use case, imagine we have a web shop and we sell our own products. Products have a set of attributes like title, description, price, etc. But each product will also contain a sales value attribute. This sales value defines how much profit is gained when we're going to sell that product. So every time we sell a product, we can count up the sales values and we can actually see how much profit we gain. But we have a big company and we have people that are looking into our data, which are not managers, and we maybe don't want to show that sales value or show to the rest of the company how much profit we're actually making. I don't know if it's the best type of setup for a company, but you might have a certain use case that could be pretty similar. So let's demo this. As you can see, I have localhost, the OpenSearch that I just booted up with my Docker Compose. And I can log in here with admin. It's not a good password. And now we're actually inside OpenSearch dashboard. So let's open this up. For you that's been using OpenDistro, you that's been using Elastic, this might be, or Kibana actually, might actually look very familiar, except for the coloring and the naming. It looks pretty similar still to the old setup. And what we're going to do is first we're going to create our web shop and then get that data in. So let's go to DevTools, and we can see that we have actually no data in here, just the dot indices, which are all system indices, and we have a security audit log. I will make this text a bit bigger. There we go. And we can see that we're running OpenSearch 1.0. All right, I'm not going to write down all the products because that would be taking too long. So I actually have a small thing prepared. If my laptop works, yep, paste it. And what we're going to do is we're going to index this in bulk to a products index. And then when we have everything in, my laptop is also not really agreeing with all the heat. It's having a harder time than I thought it would have. So let's see what happens. In the meantime, we can have a small peek maybe at this one, which is still loading. So even if nothing catches up, we are not able to do this in OpenDistro. So it's back now, it's still loading. The products are in. So let's do a product search, and I'll show you what kind of data we have. Yeah. So what we're selling is phones. So we have an Apple iPhone 8 with different storage specifications and different colors. Each product has a sales value, like I mentioned before, a price, how many we've sold. We have some things in stock. How many products do we still have in stock in our warehouse? A title, brand, color, series, and storage size. So we have like the most basic information about a product that we could have. Now, like I said, we have this web shop, and as a manager, we want to be able to see how much we're selling and see how much profit we're gaining. But we're going to build in for users that are not managers that they cannot see the data. Well, in order to see data, you can do that in two ways. You can either use a console like this and make a query and see the data. But for non-managers or non-developers or whoever in your organization, it's not the best way to show how much money you've earned so far. So what you normally do is create visualizations and create a dashboard. Now, I don't have any dashboards in here yet. But what we're going to do, let's actually do have. Let's see, I think what I wanted to show before was to actually that I can index, get all these objects in. So what I did before is that I have all these visualizations that I would not have had in here. So I'm just gonna, just for the purpose of showing, I'm gonna delete these for a sec. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna import them. Now, and what this import is actually I created these visualizations in Elasticsearch before, in Kibana. And one of the cool things about both OpenDistro and both OpenSearch is that you can export them into an NDJSON file and then re-import that NDJSON file in either of the applications. So you can drop that in here and say import. And what it's doing is actually loading that JSON file, and it sees all that configuration that I had. And you can actually see that here it still had the configuration of 7.10.2. So the visualizations that I imported now are not based on OpenSearch. So, and we'll see that appearing. We can remove these advanced settings because they don't actually do anything and they don't get applied anymore. But just to make sure we don't get any weird stack traces along the way, I'll just remove them. And we can actually go and see that dashboard and see what kind of data we have. So let's open that main dashboard. And you can see that the total number of products sold is pretty high. We've got quite some total earnings, and we can see which products are actually bringing in the most amount of money. And we can see them also in the list. So we can see the number of sold per product in order of number of sold. Here is the how much profit accumulated per product. And you can see with only the few phones and products that we're selling, we're earning quite a bit of money. So maybe we don't want to show that to the whole company. So we now just have one user. We logged in as admin, and let's just assume that the manager always logs in with admin. That means that we have to create a new user that will have a different role than admin, and we'll get to see much less of the data. So let's open up the navigation and go to security. In security, for the part that we're going to be showing now, there are a few things that are important, and it's roles and internal users. So roles tell something about a user or a group of users, what kind of permissions they can have in OpenSearch. So since we now have our admin user, which has an admin role, we first want to make non-manager role, and then create the non-manager user, and link those two together, and log in as the non-manager. So let's create a new role. And this can be quite tricky in the beginning. I will cover at the end a migration story that we did moving from Elasticsearch to OpenDistro. And this was one of the harder parts of migrating, because it can be quite hard to figure out what permissions you need for certain things and how the whole system works together. But I hope after this little demo, you will get it a bit more easy. So let's make this non-manager role, where we need to set some cluster permissions. So cluster-wide, what is this user able to do? Now, there's a lot of permissions already pre-configured, and you can make your own. But for the most basic user configuration, you can use the permissions that are already in there. And the good thing, there's something called the cluster composite ops RO, and RO stands for read-only. So with this, the user is able to get some information. It can actually write away some of the audit logging. There's quite some standard things that are covered for read-only users if you choose this cluster permission. So keep the cluster composite ops RO in mind. All right, and then we have index permissions. And index permissions tell for a specific role which indices they can access, and what they can do with it, how they can interact with those indices. Are they able to only get rid of, are they only able to search? Are they only able to post new data? Are they able to delete? And we'll set those up for 2 indices. So the first one will be for the .kibana index. And you might be wondering why, but it is because our visualizations and dashboards are stored in the .kibana index. And we're actually using a star right now for the demo purpose, because I'm not too sure, to be honest, in which of the Kibana indexes this one lives right now. So for the purpose of this demo, we'll just use star and make sure that we have a working demo. Then we are able to only read the data, which is good enough. And then we have document level security configuration, field level, and anonymization. But for the Kibana index, we don't have to handle those. So let's fold this in and add another index permission. Now this one is a bit more interesting. So we created our products index, which contains all our product data. So we're going to do products star, since we might do some name changing with timestamps and indices, etc. And we will say read again, since the non-manager can only read this information. Now, if you want to restrict the kind of data in a more document level way, you can add a query here. So for instance, if you want non-managers only to look at data from the last year, you could add a range query here saying only data from last year and up. Or if there are certain category of products that you don't want to show non-managers in your company, you can add a query here so they get excluded automatically. For now, we're going to look at field level security. So as I mentioned in the use case before, we want to limit the user to be able to see the sales value field. And that's something we can do with field level security. So here we can type sales value. From that moment on, whenever a user, non-manager, does a request for data, the sales value field will be excluded from the response. So this means that in the visualizations that we'll look at later, they will not be able to see the profit. The next one is anonymization, which is actually a pretty cool feature, also called field masking, which actually generates a random ID for certain values, so that it's not possible for users to figure out what kind of data they're looking at. And to show how this works, we'll do something like title. So anonymize the title so that when a non-manager logs in, you actually is not able to see which product is the top selling product. So let's add that one as well, purely for demo purpose. And then the last one, tenant permissions. This one is actually quite important and actually made me stumble a bit before. But tenants are like separate spaces within an account for your organization. So if you see up top here, we can switch to the right and we say switch tenant. And here you see global. And global means we're in the global tenant. Everything we do in the global tenant, creating visualizations, creating dashboards, that means that if someone has access to the global tenant, they have access to those visualizations and dashboards. By default, if you log in as a user, you will have your private tenant, meaning that if you create a visualization, it's not accessible by other people. Under the hood, it's actually making a .kibana and then the username index to store all that data, and it's not accessible by other users. For now, all the data for the visualizations that we just imported is in the global tenant. So we want to be able, for this user role, to have access to the global tenant. So here we can say global tenant, and you see admin tenant, which is the user we are now. Or we say global tenant, read only. So when the non-manager logs in, he's also not able to add new visualizations or delete dashboards, etc. And you can add more of those if you want to share some stuff all around. So let's create. So I think now we have everything for our non-manager role. We have access to Kibana to see visualizations, and we got access to products, so we can actually get the data to fill the dashboards. Now there's a tab here called Map Users. And in this Map Users, it says there's no user been mapped, and you can either add map users or backend roles. The distinction is nice because you can either say, I have an explicit user that is a non-manager, which is nice because you can point out, oh, this certain person needs this role right now. But you can also use backend roles, which means that every user account that has a certain backend role will automatically get this role applied. But since we don't have an internal user yet, let's create one. And we'll open a new tab, and we'll go to create. At one point. Sneak peek here. We're still loading. Are we? Yeah, we're still loading. Oh, in the meantime, we're back here. So let's create an internal user, and we call him John. John. And we need to have a password for John, and I'll make that also super easy. Okay. And here you can either decide to give him the backend role, non-manager, or we can do it later and we can link him as a user. So here you could choose for yourself what you want to do. Is John a super special non-manager, and is he the only one that needs to get this role applied? Or are you going to add non-managers in bulk, and do you just want to give them a backend role so it automatically links to each other? For now, we'll do the first one. So we're going to explicitly add John as a non-manager. And then we can add in attributes that you can use for the document level security if you want to set that up. So let's create the user, and we now have John in here. So let's go back to our role and say map users. So now for our non-manager role, we didn't actually give it a backend role that it needs to link to. So here we can either choose to link John, or if we gave John the backend role, we can link everyone with a non-manager backend role will be linked to this role. But for now, we choose John here, and we say map. And now we have John as our non-manager role. So let's open up a new tab in incognito mode and go to OpenSearch. And we will log in as John. Let's hope we did this all right. Yay. And we Let's explore on. And now we get the choice whether we want to choose a private tenant or the global tenant. Now, if we didn't add the global tenant to the role specification, this global tenant here would have been locked out. So we were not able to even choose the global tenant. Same as for the choose custom, there are no other tenants linked for this user role. So we can only choose between global and private. But for now, let's choose global because we know that the dashboard is there. Always needs a reload, which is fun at the moment. It's super fast. Quick sneak peek again. See if it works. What? Not yet. And let's go to our dashboard. And now we can actually see the dashboard, and we can open it, and we see our number of products sold. Our total earnings are 0. Actually, the total selling products, which uses a script in order to calculate, actually throws an exception, so it's not actually even showing anything, because you can see it multiplies the sale value times the value sold, gets a null in there, and goes. Doesn't work anymore. And at the bottom here now, we can actually see that we obfuscated the title field. So as a user, non-manager, we can see that there's something getting sold a lot, but we're not actually sure what it is. Now, this might not be the best setup for a company, not maybe the best setup for showing non-managers your data, but it's just to give you a feeling of what is possible with OpenDistro and OpenSearch with these extra features that are out there now. All right. Let's go back to the presentation. All right, so that was security. It's not all the features of security, it's just a really small subset of it. There are a lot more cool features in there, like different authorization backends and how you can stack those on top of each other, how you can link your own access provider, identity providers is also really neat. So there's a lot of features in there that are really cool, but it would take me a whole day for you to demo them. But I have one more. Another one is alerting, which allows for notifications based on index level conditions. And actually, in term, I think Kyle also mentioned it allows you to send notifications based on changes in your data. And just to continue on the use case we just had about our amazing product store, as you maybe remember, we had a stock attribute in our data. So how many products do we still have laying in stock? And what we want to do for the alerting use case is we would like to be added, we would like to get notified at the moment the stock of a product runs out. Because if we don't have any stock anymore, we can go to our vendor, buy some more, and then make some more money. So what we want to do now is we actually want to set up an alert in case stock runs out and get a notification in Slack. So let's demo that. So next to the OpenSearch plugins, we just took security. Now we're going to be looking at alerting. And here you can see there's still an alert from before because I had to test if everything worked in OpenSearch that I actually tried out in OpenDistro before. So first thing we want to do is we want to create a destination. And the destination is actually just a link of where do you want data to go at the point that you create a monitor and it triggers an alert. So we will add a destination, and we will call it our Slack product watcher integration. Stock watcher integration. And we want to, you're able to choose here between a custom webhook, email, Slack, and Chime. We'll use Slack, and then you need a webhook URL. Where do you get one of those? Well, there is something in Slack. And actually what I did there as a prerequisite for doing this, I created an app called Stockwatcher, and that's the only thing I did. So the only thing you have to do is you have to go to Slack, create an application or a Slack app, and then there's this tab here called Incoming Webhooks under Features, which allows you to create a webhook URL and link that to a channel. So what we're going to do is we're going to open Slack. Yeah. It's a come. No, that. Just bear with me 1 second. Instant heat. Where is the Slack? There. In the meantime, let's check again on Amazon Elasticsearch. And it's active. Nice. So in the meantime, while we were trying to get Slack running, it still doesn't want to do it. In the meantime, our AWS UG Meetup became active and gave us 2 endpoints. So the first one is the endpoint directly to OpenDistro, which we can open and see if that loads. And it will give us the prompt for our user that we set up. So we called it admin and we gave it a password. And we can see that we got OpenDistro running on 7.10.2. And we have a Kibana link, which we can open, which will say loading Elastic. Which is hard loading. Everything is too long, I think. Oh, there it is. And here we have OpenDistro for Elasticsearch, which we can also use the same credentials to work in there as well. So actually, it's pretty easy and pretty quick if you want to use Elasticsearch in the cloud or OpenDistro in the cloud to just set this up, take the free tier, doesn't cost too much a month, and it actually allows you to start playing around with it, which in the future will be replaced by OpenSearch. And here we have the same stuff we just saw in OpenSearch as well. So we have the tenants, and now we're in. So that's it. So let's continue with the learning use case, and we're gonna open Slack. If it wants to get open. Yes. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a channel. So I'm going to create a channel called AWS Bugs. Oh. So now we don't need to add any people, that's fine. And what we're going to do is in this channel, we want to receive our updates as soon as the project's stock run out. So we go back to the Slack API, and we can click a button here called Add New Webhook to Workspace. When we do that, Slack actually picks up all the channels that are available because it requires the channel to post in. So it will actually load all the channels up. And when we click on that, we can see AWS UG Stock Watcher. And we say allow. There. And now we have a webhook URL. So that's the URL we're going to need in OpenSearch in order to give updates in our Slack channel. And if we open Slack, we can see Byron added an integration to this channel, Stockwatcher, which is the app I created. So we copy this value. What does that? Not too sure now with all that. Let's see config. And we will add this webhook URL in here. Yeah, we did it. So you see hooks.slack, etc. So let's create this destination. There, we have a destination of type Slack, which will send us Stockwatcher updates when we define a monitor and add this destination to it. Let's do the next step. So we configured a destination. Now we're going to define a monitor. The monitor is actually just something that periodically checks based on certain conditions. And then later on, you create triggers, which will actually look at the output of the monitor. And then based on a true or negative result, it will actually trigger a destination to give a message. So our monitor is our stock watcher check. Let's give it a random name. We want it enabled. You can disable them by default if you want to. And the method of definition is we're going to be making an extraction query. Since I've been working with all of this for such a long time, I prefer to just write queries. I feel a little bit better. And what we're going to do is we're going to be querying the products index. Now, what we want to do is we want to get a product returned. So we just want to do one first. It's fine. We can just check. We do a query, and if we get one product back that matches our result, then we want to do something with that product. And what we'll be doing is we'll create a range query on our field stock, and we'll say, just to check first and see what the results does, is the stock needs to be greater than or equal to 10. And you can press run. So this is easy for like debugging purposes, creating the monitor. You can see, okay, did I write my query right? And what we see is that we have a hit. We actually have 10 hits, but we just focus on one result because we asked for a size of 1. And we can see that it has 10 in stock. Now, if we change this greater than equals into lesser than equals and we put it onto 0, which we can actually check if the rest of the code works fine, we can see that we don't have any hits because right now all products are in stock. But this is the step that we want to have. So now if we go down, you can actually get information about how long this query takes. You can make a decision about how often you want to run this. You can check if your query performance doesn't degrade the server in that sense. And then it allows you to check how often, or allows you to configure how often you want to do the checks. So right now we'll say by interval, could also be just daily, weekly, monthly, custom cron. But now we're just going to say every minute is fine. So we say create the monitor. So now we have the monitor and we have the destination. Now we need to link the two, and you do that with triggers. So the trigger is let's put our name, send message 0 stock. That's a trigger. It's actually the name of the alert also, which will pop up in the dashboard. So you can change the severity level as soon as you start adding more types of alerts, or if you do a completely different type of alerts, maybe more on performance of clusters, performance of machines. Maybe you're using OpenSearch for ingesting logs and you want to be triggered on certain keywords inside your logs. All up to you. It's really broad with what you can do. This is how you can use this. So here you can see the response that you're getting, and here you can create your own trigger conditions. So by default, the trigger condition is if there's more than one result or more than 0 results, then the value will be true, and otherwise it will be false. So if we run this, it will actually say false because based on the monitor we made, right now there's nothing going on. If this would be flipping to true, we would actually get our message, or at least that's what we want to do. So for now, this is great. We don't have to change anything about these levels because we already did that in the monitoring. Then we will get an action. And so when the trigger happens, we want an action to be combined to it. And this is where we define the message about what we're going to send in our Slack message. So we say send to Slack. It's the action name. And now we can choose our destination that we pre-configured. The message subject can be product stock is out, go out and buy some more. And actually at this point, you can actually include data about the specific product. You can add data about when the last one was sold. For now, I will just use the default so we can actually see that just the integration is working. But you can go bananas with this if you want to. And we can get a preview. And then the last step, which can be quite nice, is action throttling. So if you remember, we put the trigger on, or we did put the monitor on check every minute. But maybe you don't want it to keep updating you every minute, stock is out, because you might be busy handling it. So we can enable action throttling, which says, okay, only throttle this action once every 10 minutes. For now, that's fine, because it's just a demo. So let's do create. And now you get this a bit more fancy dashboard, which actually allows you to track actions that happened, how often they happened, if they've been acknowledged by people. Maybe you have a bigger company, maybe more people are looking at these alerts, and you actually need to have some support people to actually handle this at times. It could also be that you're triggering these alerts based on user interaction, and you actually need to do something for that specific user. Yeah, it all depends on your use case. But for now, let's go into another tab and change that stock of a certain product. Now, if we do a search again, just to get the product out, we can see our, the Apple iPhone 8. Let's change its stock to 0. So let's act as if this product was sold 10 times. Again, it's maybe not the best place to put your stock information. I would argue with that. Again, it's just for showing what we can do. And what we're going to do is we're going to update this and say that stock is 0. Yeah. So let's update it. Now, the monitor triggering time is every minute. So, which means that I either need to talk for a full minute, or we can maybe be lucky and get a monitor trigger earlier. I hear something in my ear. And actually now we see product stock is out. Go out and buy some more. Monitor stock was just check and entered into an alert status. Please investigate the issue. So now we actually successfully create an alert which triggers based on information inside your data. And we allowed it to send messages to a Slack channel, which means that now someone can go out and go buy a new Apple iPhone for us to sell. So that was alerting. I know that the use case is maybe not the most recognizable. I don't think a lot of people here want to use this alerting feature for detecting stock values, but at least it shows you what is possible with it. And it's something that was always behind a license within Elasticsearch, which for me was really nice to start using it in OpenDistro as a part of my normal development. Because if it's not behind a license and it's open source, yeah, there's actually more power behind using it. All right, then the migration story. So what we did was we actually had a client that was running Elasticsearch, which we actually moved to OpenDistro. The reason for that is that the client was an institution, and the institution runs on money gifted by other organizations and other people. So they actually want to keep their cost profile as low as possible. And one of the things they wanted was the field level access control and the anonymization features that existed in OpenDistro, which were behind the license for Elasticsearch. So what we did was talk with them and see, does OpenDistro fit for you? And is it something we can easily migrate? Because they actually have a lot of data. And just doing a cluster switch from Elastic to OpenDistro actually takes some work. So we're still actually in the middle of a transition here. So we started doing this migration 2 months ago, and there's still a lot of data that had to be migrated. But overall, the migration has been a success so far. So now we're actually wondering, do we need to go to OpenSearch? And I think the answer is yes. Since OpenDistro is going to be end of life at one point, all focus is going to be on OpenSearch. We're also going to have to make the change to OpenSearch. But we're not sure yet if we're going to do it soon or when that's going to happen. But seeing as how easy the migration from Elasticsearch to OpenDistro was, I have nice expectations of the move of OpenDistro to OpenSearch. But just a little bit more about that use case. So the institution has a connected group of organizations, not just one, but multiple. And each organization has different type of users. So they have some researchers and they have some managers. Maybe sounds a bit familiar because the researcher has a limited view of the data, but the manager can actually see all of the data. It wasn't just limited to these 2 roles. There were actually maybe 8 or 10. So each of these roles had a different set of cluster permissions, index permissions, and all of this data was stored in a single index. So instead of creating an index per organization, we needed to support all these organizations inside one single index, because there was also people from the institution that had to have their own specific views on data of all those different organizations. So it was a lot of configuration in the role-based access control, document level security, and the anonymization. The tenant setup and the security aspect in a whole was really important. Some of the lessons we learned there is that reindexing data between Elasticsearch and OpenDistro works perfectly. actually we had no issues transferring the data back and forth using the native reindex API. In a way, it's maybe weird to expect that it won't, but yeah, you always expect between two different products to have some issues with that. But it worked pretty nice, except for the Kibana index. The Kibana index I could copy over, but it would just not integrate all the new the visualizations and dashboards. But you can use the export-import tool, like I just said, to transfer those visualizations and dashboards. Another lesson learned is you have to export your OpenDistro security configuration if you're going to set up more environments. In OpenDistro, if you have security configuration, it's contained inside an index, but that index also is not transferable. You actually have to use an export security config command to dump those to XML files, move those files over, and then import them. So if you're setting up acceptance environment, testing environments, etc., make sure you don't screw up the export versus import commands, because they are pretty similar. And something that happened was that we came pretty far with setting up the security roles. And then instead of an export, ran an import on the XML files, which made us start from scratch again. All right. I showed you a little bit of OpenSearch. I showed you a little bit of OpenDistro. I hope it helped. Seeing what kind of features there are, seeing the features and what you can do with them. And time for questions.
Hey, Byron, can you hear me?
Hey, yes.
Great.
Oh,
yeah, that was a... Hey, thanks a lot for your talk. That was a really good addition to Carl's talk, I think. And you managed to rebrand the talk in a few days while at your in-laws in Sweden. So, mad respect. And what I specifically enjoyed were the Swedish birds singing in the background. It was a great addition. Nicely done.
Nice. I didn't know you could hear them. Cool.
You can. While you were talking, Carl showed up in the chat as Searchy McSearch face, and he answered some questions about this OpenSearch service being renamed, or at least the Elasticsearch service, to Amazon OpenSearch service, and about the anomaly detection. Jacco asked if that was proprietary code, but it was open source code, which you can look up in GitHub. So that was a nice addition to his talk. If there are any questions for you, I don't see them in the chat yet. Then we'll probably go to the outro. So, Rode, do you... Wait, let me share my screen first, and we can put the agenda on. Because we have some, or at least one event in the future that we know of.
Yes, but before we wish you all a good night, we'd like to mention the AWS Community Day, which is in September, as you can see. Keep an eye on it and register when signing up is possible. Don't miss out. Thanks for attending this webinar and have a good evening.
And have a good holiday, Byron.
And Byron, have a good holiday, yes.
See you all soon.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.